So Lidia is probably the least known character in the entirety of Tekken 7. And I'm not saying that based on a popularity standpoint, I'm not saying that based on an age standpoint, but I'm saying that in terms of a presence standpoint. When Lidia was released, the consensus on her tier-wise was, well, there wasn't really a consensus at all. You had a lot of people that was saying she was mid-tier. You had some people saying that she was broken. I was a Lidia player, and I fell into the camp of saying that she was broken. This is in the same vein as what a lot of people were saying about Fakenram for the first month he was released. Oh, he's mid-tier, then he started playing in tournaments, and then everyone saw how broken Fakenram was. Lidia never got that tournament presence just because she came out at a poor time because of COVID. Regardless of that, though, she ended up getting nerfed, and she ended up getting nerfed pretty heavily, and still today she's seen basically no tournament play whatsoever, and there still isn't a consensus on where she's at. You have people like Book that say that she's around mid-tier, and then you have people like Need that say that she's in the dumpster. I'm of the opinion that after her nerfs, she was put in the dumpster. So let's talk about first how she got here, how she went from being either mid-tier to incredibly good to mid-tier or completely unusable trash. So the first thing that is good about Lidia is counter hits. This is a big thing with Lidia. Lidia is very much an in-your-face, aggressive, counter hit heavy character. She, in my opinion, is supposed to play a lot like a Virtua Fighter character, and that kind of shows not only with her moveset, but also her having Virtua Fighter style inputs. So the way that this works is that she has a lot of moves like down forward 1, back 2, down forward 4, that are strings. They are 2-hit or sometimes 3-hit strings that will lead to big counter hit states if the opponent presses. So even though this move might be -5, this back 2, she has back 2, 3 here, which is a -9 and leads to a counter hit launcher. She has moves like her down forward 1, right? -5, pretty decent down forward 1. Natural down forward 1, 2 here does 23 damage. +8 on hit, it's pretty decent. But then, to keep you guessing on the down forward 1, she has down forward 1, 3. While -13 also leads to a full launch on counter hit. And so the way that Lidia used to work is that all of these sort of counter hit strings are great, except if the opponent doesn't have an incentive to hit a button. And that's where her hellweep came into all of this. Her hellweep is what completed this whole kit of hers. Of course, she did have other lows like down back 2, but it's not great because it's -14 on block, -1 on hit. Down back 4, which is pretty slow. Or she could go for the from crouch mix-up, but that just takes a lot of time and is more telegraphed. So instead, what Lidia had was the hellweep. And the hellweep is what's supposed to get the opponent to actually move and be reactive, because if all you do here is you're scared of the counter hit and you wait for the hit to come out to take your turn, well, instead of finishing that, she can go for the hellweep. And the hellweep that Lidia has is a bit special, because unlike a lot of hellweeps that give you Oki or reset neutral, Lidia's hellweep is actually disadvantageous for her on hit. She cannot do anything on hit, and she has to eat a 50-50 wake-up kick mix-up. Of course, this is also a risk for the opponent if they choose to commit to the mix-up, because she has her 12-frame punish if she blocks the mid wake-up kick, and she can low parry the low wake-up kick. So a lot of the time what happens is the opponent will just get up, but then if the opponent just gets up, then Lidia gets Oki. So it creates this mind game off of the hellweep that a lot of characters don't have. So on top of her strong counter hits and some oppressive strings like back 2, she also has some good keep out tools. Keep out tools such as forward 4. Really, really good move, +7 on hit. -3 on block, allows her to keep moving around. Moves like back 3 here. Back 3, +4, -7 on hit, not that great. But when you consider that she has follow-ups off of it as well, it becomes quite a bit better, especially when one of those follow-ups makes her +14. She has some other moves as well, like down forward 4, down forward 2, and then forward forward 2, which we'll get into. That's a whole nother thing. One weakness as well that people say that Lidia has is sidestepping. She's very weak to sidestep. But a lot of these moves as well, especially the back 2 here, actually tracks to her weak side. The two main moves that do track to her weak side are back 2 and down forward 4. And down forward 4 gives her this high that's +1, and also knocks them down, does 30 damage, is pretty decent. And then she also has the back 2 here, and the back 2, 3, of course, -9. So what you can do a lot of the time is if someone's stepping a lot, this move is a great way to be able to stop them from sidestepping. Back 2, 1, natural 29 damage +5, pretty good. Also, can set up for hellweep. Stops them from wanting the press as well because of the 3 here that is safe and launches on counter hit. She also has a pretty decent homing move in back 4. A lot of people, for whatever reason, saw this move and said it was a bad homing move because they wanted to commit to the whole string and it was launch punishable. And the whole string is pretty bad, but the first hit by itself is homing 16 frames +6 on hit and only -3 on block, which is pretty strong, especially when if you just do the 2 hits, you just do the follow-up and they choose not to duck it, or they're worried about ducking the second hit, allows you to continue your pressure, and then if it hits, get forward 3 guaranteed. It's a pretty decent homing move. So she has a lot of strong pros, and she definitely has some cons, right? Even though this is a pretty good tracking move to a weak side, and she is still fairly susceptible to sidestep because a lot of her key moves do get beat by sidestep. It's not like she's completely hopeless to it, but she definitely struggles against sidestepping and sidewalking. She has to be really in your face to be able to do anything. It requires a lot of conditioning to be able to set up the sidestepping. There are a lot of mind games that play here when throwing out the mid launches, especially this one, because if you lose your turn, then Lidia is fairly hopeless. Her parry isn't all of that strong, all things considered, and does put her at risk. She does have some weaknesses, but the strengths that she had were incredibly strong. A lot of this changed, though, in the 5.0 update, and the main thing that changed, along with a litany of other nerfs that we'll get to, is the hellweep. What they changed with the hellweep is they made it so that the clean hit on the hellweep was closer to the opponent, meaning that a lot of these moves that stagger the opponent and set up for the hellweep no longer work. And the reason for this is because the opponent can now backdash out of the hellweep in pretty much any situation. So instead of having to be reactionary and proactive in your defense to defending against the hellweep, now if Lidia tries to set for the hellweep, as you can see now, the move just doesn't clean hit. Whereas before this update, it would have. Which means that basically anything that Lidia does to try setting up for hellweep, it can be completely countered by just backdashing. And then on some characters such as Fong, the clean hit is basically non-existent anymore. You have to be right on top of them to be able to get a clean hit. But even at round start here, as you can see, the hellweep just doesn't clean hit, and it's -7 on block on hit. And don't forget that's still launch punishable as well. So basically, if this happens, at best, you just lose your turn. You can see even on a move like down 4-1 here, and this maybe highlights it a bit better. I can't backdash out of the hellweep, but you can see that just tapping back here gets me out of clean hit range and ends her turn completely because she's -7. It essentially means that what you have to do, instead of threatening with the counter hit attack and then doing the hellweep to get them to be proactive, now instead what you have to do is do this, run at them, so take a risk doing that, and then go for a mix-up. The problem as well then, when it comes to that, is Lidia doesn't have a lot of great mids. Even her hop kick doesn't do a lot because it tail spins on hit. She also doesn't have a generic down forward 2. So a lot of the mids that she would potentially have to get the opponent to not duck, like with a character, say, Heihachi, she just simply does not have, and that only exacerbates the issue. So now the only lows you can really do in neutral are down back 2, which is not a very good low because it's -1 on hit and -14 on block, which means a lot of characters like Jin, Raven can launch this low. It's just not usable in a lot of matchups, especially when you consider it only does 14 damage. And then she has her other low, down back 4, which is a bit better at +1, but it's still 22 frames and is still -13 on block. Moves like this would normally be, with how slow they are, -12. Being -13 means, of course, that a lot of characters can wall splat off of this. Some can, like Addy and Kazuya, can launch you. So again, it's not a great low, especially when it has no crushing properties and it's 22 frames. And then the only launch she has left is from crouch down forward 3. But from crouch down forward 3 is telegraphed because, of course, it's a crouching move. So then what Lidia has to commit to is either a mid, of which a lot of her while rising mids are risky, because they either have highs in them or they're punishable. So she doesn't have, unlike a character like, say, Julia, or hell, if we're going back in time, Wong, characters that have bow and arrow-esque moves, Lidia doesn't have very strong mids to be able to mix up with that, even in crouching. So the problem that this causes with the hellweep nerf is it gives the opponent very little reason to duck Lidia or to attack when she's doing these strings, because if she does down back 1, she basically loses her turn. If she does down back 4, it's super slow and doesn't do a lot of damage to be that scared of it. It also puts that big risk of getting counter hit launch magic forward. And if that was the only nerf, then it would hurt the character, but there are some other things, and I'm sure that you're already thinking about this and saying that you can use that instead, or how you have the low out of this stance. And don't worry, we'll get to that, because that stuff is a whole nother thing entirely. Some odd big nerfs that she had as well is she lost the wall splat property on her 12 frame and 14 frame punishes. Forward 2-4 is the big one here. This is a 12 frame punish. If you recall from what I said earlier, when she does the house sweep, if the opponent does the wake up mid kick or the wake up low kick, she can punish the mid kick with her 12 frame punish, which also wall splatted. So if the opponent's back was to the wall and you did the house sweep, now if they did the wake up mid kick and you blocked it, you got a wall splat and you did 70 damage. It was very, very scary, which gave Lidia a huge advantage at the wall and only at the wall. And because of this nerf, she basically completely lost that. Not only that, but Lidia is the only character in the entire game that doesn't have a punish that wall splats. Not a single one. Not even her launcher, because her launcher tailspins. So technically you can say that it wall splats, but it's a tailspin. So you can't wall splat them and then say sidewalk or be at an angle at the wall and then get a full combo because you've already tailspinned. She also had her forward 1+2 clean hit removed, and this indirectly nerfed some moves as well, such as her while running 1. There you go. So removing the clean hit here on this move reduces the overall damage output of it. Other moves as well, such as down forward 3-1-2. Get forward 4, clean hit property removes, reduces the damage a lot. She had some other weird nerfs too, like forward 3. They removed the wall splat in forward 3, which is really weird and doesn't make sense when forward 3+4 does exactly the same thing as forward 3. Other things as well. Back 3-4 1+2. They turned from being safe or -5 to -10, which means that the move is basically useless because this is -11, this is a high, and really all this is doing is checking the opponent if they try launching the high. But with it being -10, it makes this pretty much useless. There is some use case at the wall because it wall splats and you can delay it, but a lot of the time you would rather just do the one, because as shown earlier, on counter hit this actually does something. So they also nerfed the damage on hop kick by a couple of points. And then we get into her stances. And if that was all of the things that she did, she would have been hurt pretty bad, but things still would have made some sense, even if there was a lot of problems, which again, we'll get to in a moment. But the things that they changed in her stances here just make absolutely no sense and ruined a major aspect of the character. So we'll start with the less egregious one, which is her cat foot 2 stance. So her cat foot 2 stance did have one change that was pretty interesting. They changed this string to be a wall bounce string, and they changed the properties on it quite a bit, which made the string stand out a bit more from the other moves that she has in cat foot 2. That was really the only change here. The problems we get to when we go into the transition stance. One of the things that they did was they made 3-1 not natural on normal hit, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And the reason why is because she has this move. This move does 36 damage and is +6 on block. It is a tad bit slower than the 3, but with the transition, it doesn't matter, because if the opponent gets a read that you're going to transition from this stance to this stance, you're going to get launched regardless of what move you do. So it's irrelevant that the move is slightly faster in this case. So by making this move not natural, it makes the move basically useless when compared to 1. Because 1 does not have any disadvantages compared to 3-2 and is just better in every way. The only saving grace of 3-1 is that the second hit launches on counter hit. But that doesn't matter because you have to take a big risk where you could get launched by going into the second stance anyway. And then this first hit only does 19 damage and is +4. So it doesn't really matter. Why would you go through all of that risk when you could just do this, be +6, and then continue to pressure the opponent? But then the other change that they made, which makes absolutely no sense at all, is to change to her 4. So the 4 does 23 damage, knocks down, gives you a bit of a launch on counter hit. It's a pretty good move, but of course there's a lot of risk to it because you have to transition into this stance, which is -11 off of your 10 frame punish, -7 off of down forward 2, and because the fastest move in here is 15 frames, means that if the opponent has a read on you going into that stance, you could get launched for it. So there is always risk going into this stance. Previously, this low on block was -12. They changed it to be -13. When you consider the risk that you're already taking to go into this stance, and you also consider the reward that you get off of this move, just doesn't make any sense. Also consider the fact that she has a low already in the first one. Granted, it's launch punishable, but it also does 27 damage. And then, of course, at the wall, gives you forward 3 guaranteed. So it turned this mix-up in this mind game from being interesting because of the risk-reward you had to consider off of going into this stance, the difference in moves, how much advantage that you have with the moves that out of this stance versus this one, into basically a nothing stance. Because why would you take the risk of getting launch punished to go into this stance when you can just do the mids out of this one? That's still wall splats. Granted, it's -10. This is still a safe mid. That's +9 on hit. You still have this move that you can stagger for the wall bounce. You have this one that you can use in case the opponent tries moving. And then, of course, you have the low. So what advantage now do the moves in this stance have over the moves in the first stance? And the answer is they have a little bit, but not enough to take the risk, at least most of the time. But that's not even the big issue. The big issue is this stance. Because this stance is supposed to be one of her main stances. Her game plan, her moveset is supposed to revolve around both of these stances. This is what makes her unique. And we've already outlined why there's problems with the first one. The second one is even worse. This stance does not function. It does not work. It is completely useless. And let me explain to you why. There were already problems with this stance. For one, the first part of this stance doesn't have any lows. It does not have a throw. It has absolutely nothing. All you have are mids and highs. One of those highs, this one, basically, it's like borderline useless pretty much. It's a seeable high, you get ducked and you get launched. You have the 4, which knocks down. That's pretty nice, gives you plus frames. You have the 1 here just as a quick high that can wall splat, is plus on block as well. That's all right. And then you have the 2, which is your counter hit launcher out of this stance in case the opponent hits buttons. What these moves are supposed to do is stop your opponent or persuade your opponent from hitting buttons when you try transitioning into this stance. If your opponent tries to hit buttons, the 2 will counter hit launch them. The 1 you can throw out is fairly fast and is plus on block, so it is sort of your in-between move. The 2 was -9 on block. The 4 is your slower move that gives you some plus frames and keeps them in your face. The 3 again is useless. So these moves are supposed to complement the stance transition and be part of the mind game. So they did 2 things here which severely hampered this mind game. The first thing that they did was they turned the 4 from +8 to +4. You also notice how much knockback there is as well, which means, as we stated before, you cannot do your hellweep off of this on block, and because you're on the +4, they can of course start backdashing and you can't catch up to them. They could do a keep out move, they could sidestep, etc, etc. And oh, by the way, your magic 4 is a Tekken 8 magic 4. We'll get to that. So that made this move incredibly risky, and it removed basically all of the advantage to it. Being +4 is not quite enough to make this move very worthwhile. Granted, it gives a knockdown on hit and gives you a guaranteed follow-up, but who's getting hit by that move? The other thing that they did as well is they made the 2 -10 on block instead of -9. And that makes the 2 pretty much useless. That makes the 2 pretty much completely useless, because all this move does on hit, only on hit, not counter hit, just on hit, it's +4. It only gives you the launcher on counter hit. It does basically nothing on normal hit. You may as well do the 1. You may as well do the 1. Hell, you may as well do the 4. Okay, you might not may as well do the 4 because they can still interrupt with a 10-frame move, but then you have the 1. The 1 just becomes more useful at this point than 2 because the 2 carries so much risk to it. But the truth is that none of this ever even mattered in the first place. And the reason why is because this stance transition does not function. It is non-functional, and it has always been non-functional, and it has always been, outside of a few niche Oki situations, completely useless. And I'll show you the frame data to show you why. So as you can see, the total time that takes to go into the stance from something like forward 2 is 20 frames. It is 20 frames to be able to transition into the stance. You can see this stance transition +15, then -5. That means it is a total of 20 frames to be able to transition into the stance. The other thing is that your fastest move in here is 16 frames, which means that the total time from you doing forward 2 to doing a move out of this stance is 36 frames. And if you do the math, if you do a 10-frame move to interrupt, that means you have 25 frames to be able, in total, to be able to react to the stance and interrupt with a 10-frame move. And of course, that's within the realm of reactability. And I'll demonstrate that. So I have a recording set up now to do this move, to do this move, and to do this move. So that's the problem. As you can see, I've clearly demonstrated how the stance transition is reactable. And when you can react to the stance transition, of course, that makes everything in this stance basically fall apart. But it makes both of the stances almost completely useless, again, outside of a few niche okie situations, because you have absolutely no incentive when she does forward, forward 2 and goes into this stance to do anything. Because she has nothing that poses any risk to you when she's in this stance. Absolutely nothing. So if she does forward, forward 2, which is heralded as the god move for Lidia, you can just stand there and block and wait for the stance transition, interrupt it with a 10-frame move, and Lidia can essentially do nothing, which means that this entire mind game I just demonstrated with this first stance, completely nullified, basically doesn't exist because it all relies on the opponent guessing that you're going to go into this stance. It relies on you conditioning your opponent to think that you're going to go into this stance. But if this stance essentially does not exist, then nothing in this stance works. So the silver lining from before was that if you went into this stance manually, you could get a big counter hit off of the 2. Or you could do the 4 to get plus frames. You could do forward, forward 2 in the 4, even though it was slow and could get sidestepped. You could do that for the plus frames. You could do this at the wall for the plus frames. Now, because of the nerfs that they made to 2, that means that you can't just throw this out in neutral because it's -10. That's stupid. You may as well do this. And the 4 being only +4 means that it just doesn't do enough and it's way too slow. So what this means is that Lidia's core identity, the thing that is supposed to make her unique, does not work. It does not function, and therefore she as a character cannot function. In theory, the idea behind what they were trying to do here is interesting. But in practice, it just does not work because the stance transition is reactable. And the weird thing too is that this isn't the case with this one. Because as you can see, there's a little bit of a delay before she goes into the next stance. So even though I'm hitting forward here, because there's a little bit of the delay, you can't react to the stance transition. But in this one, as soon as I press forward, she starts going into the next stance. That's what makes it reactable, is that there's no delay in the transition at all. So you have enough time to be able to react to it. And that's what makes this character such a broken, non-functional mess. She had ways to be able to circumvent those issues because of her other strengths in the past before update 5.0. But after that, the intention, I believe, for Bandai Namco was to make you have to utilize these stances more. And if the frame data on this stance made sense, and if this stance transition wasn't reactable, then it would be unique and it would be interesting and it would be fun. It would be a unique take on a in-your-face mix-up heavy character. The God breaks would be interesting. The mix-ups out of this stance would be interesting. You would have interesting mind games that you have to play. Unfortunately, she doesn't have any of that because Bandai Namco can't design a DLC character properly to save their life. In Lidia's case, though, it's not because she's broken. Well, it is because she's broken, just in a different sense of the word. But that's not the only thing that's weird about Lidia. The other thing that's weird about Lidia, she has quite a few moves that just don't have any purpose and don't make any sense for her to have. One example, 1+2. 31 frame move, 20 damage, -9 on block. You can charge it up and then be +17. What good does that do? Oh, it launches on hit. Yeah, but when you ever going to hit someone with a 65 frame non-unblockable move? It's just not going to happen. The forward 4-3 series. So she has these moves forward 4-3. It gives her a high that's a reactable high and a mid that's -12 on block. What's the point of this, especially when it's not natural? 0 on hit and not even natural on counter hit. Who knows? Back 1+2. This could be seen as combo filler, but at the same time, this is not what she uses in combos. What's the point of this move? Her 1-4 punish. It's +1 on hit and just worse than every other punish that she has. Again, there's no purpose for it. Up back 1 is a sidestepping move that's -12, kind of like Asuka's sidestep 2 in Tekken 8. But it barely avoids anything. What's the point of it? And then we have the smoking gun. Down back 3. And down back 3, of course, is a low parry. It has a built-in low parry Sabaki, like Asuka does in Tekken 8. But in Tekken 7, you can just low parry and get a full combo off of it, and wall travel, and wall conversion, and Oki. So what is the point of this move? Oh, well, it's still an attack. It's +6, but it's 22 frames. But it is +6 and -3 on block. Okay, but what's the purpose of it really? And of course the answer is that this is a move that makes more sense in Tekken 8, because having moves like this with defensive characters, like, again, that's why Asuka has hers as well. Her down back 1+2, I believe, is notation. These moves are much, much more powerful. Also, punch parries such as down forward 1+2, and while in Tekken 7, yes, it has some uses, parries in Tekken 8 are not only more common, but also much stronger because of how the heat system works, because there's some moves like Jin's forward 2, for example, that you're incentivized to use because of the heat transitions, and because you're incentivized to hit buttons more, parry moves just become a lot stronger. It also explains why she has stuff like 4-2, right? Same sort of magic 4 that is in Tekken 8. It would also explain something like this move, because to me, anyway, this move doesn't do a whole hell of a lot in practice, because why would you do this when you could just do that, especially when your mid was -9? And when you think about this in the context of Tekken 8, you think, oh, this does chip damage. And if it does chip damage, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, now there's more of a reason to use this move because it has different properties than a move like this. Okay, now we get to other moves that we could see her not having just in neutral, but in heat. 1+2, for example, fully charged version, probably does chip damage, might even be a guard break, especially in heat. If you think of the context of Tekken 8, this move would make a lot of sense fully charged to be a guard break. Other characters like Paul have this kind of property. The forward 4-3 series, you have forward 4-3-4, which is the safe high, and then you have the one which would be a heat engager. This is the type of thing that we see quite a bit in Tekken 8. Other moves that could be heat engages too, like back 1+2, for example, could be a heat engager. Probably with a slightly different animation and hit effect, but this mid could absolutely be a safe heat engager. Down back 1+2, wall bounces here in Tekken 8 would be your armored heat engager. Up back 1 like Asuka's sidestep 2 as a heat engager, which would make it make more sense for it to be -12. And then we also get to her rage drives, because her rage drives also share a striking resemblance to a lot of the heat smashes that we see in Tekken 8. Of course, her first one in normal stance, forward 2+3. First off, same notation as a heat smash. Let's just not let us forget about that. It's the same notation as a heat smash, but also plus on block gives her a mix-up, like how a lot of heat smashes are in Tekken 8 on block. And then, of course, on hit, we see that has the whole animation to do damage, and in Tekken 7, it has to lead into a combo to supplement the extra damage, but you can see how in Tekken 8, be a slightly different camera angle when it hits, and then it would do a little bit more damage, and then she would lose her rage drive. And then, on top of that, she also has one in this stance. And then she gets a follow-up. And this is similar to what we see with a lot of characters that have multiple stances. We see it with Xiao Yu. She has one in back turn and front turn. Raven has one in front turn and back turn. Reina has a mid in neutral, and she has a low one when she's in that stance where she goes like this out of the hellweep. We see this kind of thing with quite a few characters. And when you also consider the fact that Lidia was Tekken 7's last character, and Tekken 8 was certainly in development at the time, It's very, very obvious, looking back at it in hindsight, that Lidia was a Tekken 8 character that was thrown into Tekken 7. She is the Luke of Tekken 7. But then that begs the question, if she was the Luke of Tekken 7, why is she not in Tekken 8? I don't think this is a conspiracy theory here that she's a Tekken 8 character that was put in Tekken 7. I think it's pretty obvious looking at everything as a whole, looking at how things are broken and just don't work, looking at how Tekken 8 system functions and comparing that to Lidia. Also consider the fact that, like, Leroy, for example, a lot of his moveset also didn't make any sense, especially when it came to the parries. Why would you do down back 1+2 when you could just do back 2 in Tekken 7? Then you look at him in Tekken 8, and it makes a whole lot more sense because of how the heat system works and the heat engages and all of that. We're having the same sort of thing here with Lidia. And it's not just her gameplay alone that makes this not make a lot of sense either. She also, of course, has her own stage. We are on her stage, the stage that she came with when she became the last DLC character. Influencers got packages from Bandai Namco that contained a sheet of lore for Lidia and a belt that had Lidia on it. Merchandise for a character that we have not seen for any other DLC character for Tekken 7. There was heavy marketing for Lidia when she came out. And then on top of all that, on top of the marketing, her being the last Tekken 7 character, getting her own stage, Harada also said multiple times in an interview that she was going to be involved in the upcoming story. Lidia's own voice actress, when she was doing an interview, hinted towards her being a part of Tekken's story. So what happened? And the answer is, we don't know. We have absolutely no idea. When you consider everything that's happened up to this point, it frankly just doesn't make any sense at all that she's not in Tekken 8. I think, though, that the chances of her being DLC in Season 1 are exceptionally high. I think that the feedback that was received was better than pretty much every DLC character in Tekken 7, and I think that perhaps the logical explanation is that because they received so much positive feedback on the character, that they wanted to throw her in as DLC to make a few extra bucks and have a legacy character to sell the season pass that was fresh in people's minds. The problem is, though, they gutted her so much that no one plays her anymore. No one even remembers this character because no one sees her. Even though the reception was very positive, people are going to see a trailer for Lidia's DLC and they're gonna go, I forgot about this character. I forgot that she was even in the game. A lot of people may have dropped Lidia because of the nerfs and because she got weaker. For me personally, I played Lidia a lot. For the first few months that she was out, she was basically the only character I played. For me, she was, even though she's not a character I would typically play, she was a breath of fresh air. She felt different. She felt unique. I liked the character. I'm Polish, so I'm a bit biased. When they nerfed her, as I've demonstrated throughout this video, they changed her, and not for the better. They got rid of everything that was interesting about her and tried to make you play in a way that didn't function. Because they didn't design her correctly. They didn't design her right. This character is a walking bug. The things that you are able to do against her, you should not be able to do. You should not be able to react to that stance transition. That's clearly not intentional, but they didn't fix that. They didn't change that, and the character suffered for it. And so now, the character is a walking, talking, non-functional piece of trash, and I hate to say that, but it's true, that just simply is not fun to play. And if they had fixed those issues that were outlined before, then even with all of these nerfs, I would still say that she could easily be mid-tier and she would be fun to play. But when you have a character that just does not work at a fundamental level, she does not work in the way that she was intended to work, and she's more or less like Zafina in Tekken 6, except she might be able to be used competitively, unlike Zafina, that simply is not fun. I play Yoshimitsu, so of course I like gimmicks, but they have to be gimmicks that work. When the gimmicks that don't work and only work on people that don't know the matchup, that's not fun. And that is why I stopped playing this character. And I think for a lot of people that play Lidia, that's also why they stopped playing the character, because a lot of people that play Lidia did also think that she was mid-tier. And the nerfs that came to her, regardless of what side that you're on, did harm the character's fun. It hurt the ability to have fun playing the character. And that overall is the problem with Lidia. Will we see her in Tekken 8? Probably. Is there reason to believe that she should have been in Tekken 8 in the first place? Yes, there's a lot. When will we see her? Hopefully as DLC, and hopefully they'll fix her because I want her to be fixed. Anyway, that's my piece on Lidia. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.